in all our beauty.
The yahoos are back. And Daniel got all cleaned up and neatened up for this.
Yep.
He got a nice shave.
Yep. Trimmed.
But we're going to talk about Abraham today. And why about Abraham? Well, God has a habit of waking me up in the middle of the night and telling me things that I didn't really understand or realize. And the other night at about 2:30 in the morning, he woke me up and started talking to me about Abraham. And whenever God does that, that usually means he wants me to put a video on that. So we're going to do a video about Abraham. Abraham is described in Romans chapter 4, verse 11, if you'd like to look it up, as the father of all believers. Now, Dan, would you tell me what that means?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh?
Uh-oh.
Does Abraham have two lineages of offspring?
Kinda.
He has a DNA offspring?
Yep. He's got one of those.
And a spiritual offspring. Is that not correct?
That is correct. Yep.
And being the father of all believers, we're talking about Abraham's spiritual offspring.
Right.
Now, I was raised under what's called Reformed theology, and they claimed that the Abrahamic covenant, and so they were the offspring of Abraham, spiritual. They couldn't really claim to be Jews, so therefore they had to claim themselves as the spiritual offspring of Abraham. And I remember that when I was young, being sermons preached to me about how we were the Abrahamic offspring under the Abrahamic covenant.
I remember that as well.
Now, I before we started, I told Dan to look up a verse. And I want him to start to read that a minute. It's in John chapter 8.
You want me to start with...
I don't know.
Okay.
I'll
start at 8:31. Jesus therefore saying to those Jews who had believed him, "If you are abiding in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine."
If you're abiding in the words of God.
Yes.
The words that Jesus spoke.
Right.
Now, Jesus didn't write those words, did he?
No.
So he's saying, abide in my spoken word.
Yes.
Okay.
And then he says, "If you do that, then you are truly my disciples. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." They, the Jews, answered him, "We are Abraham's offspring, and have never yet been enslaved to anyone."
Now, wait a minute. Jesus is talking about one type of freedom, and they're talking about another one.
Yes.
They're talking about physical slavery, and Jesus is talking about slavery from sin.
Right.
And they're so stupid, they don't understand that.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we're completely disconnected as far as what Jesus is saying. And
they don't understand the agenda of God at all.
Correct.
Now, this is the religious leaders, of course. Lucky for us today, we got wonderful religious leaders that understand this all.
Have figured it all out.
And they're all cemetery trained.
Correct.
And capable of understanding these things.
And these Jews were stupid.
Yeah.
They were stupid.
Not trained,
in
the seminaries like we do, even though they did have seminary training. Paul was trained in Jerusalem. What do you think a guy from Tarshish is doing in Jerusalem? He went there for training in Phariseeism.
Yep.
Anyway, go on.
And then, how is it that you say, the Jews said, "You shall become free"? And then Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is a slave of sin."
Including you on the video.
Including you.
And us. Yep. We were slaves to sin.
That is that's our default setting.
Yeah.
Alright. "And the slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son does remain forever.
Oh.
If therefore the Son shall make you free, you shall be free indeed. I know that you are Abraham's offspring, yet you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you.
My spoken word has no place in you.
So they were claiming genetic
Salvation.
Okay. I speak the things which I have seen with my father, therefore you also do the things which you heard
From your father, the devil, of course.
They answered and said to him, Abraham is our father. Jesus said to them, if you are Abraham's children, do the deeds of Abraham.
Read that again.
If you are Abraham's children, do the deeds of Abraham.
Now, I want you watching to understand that Jesus said that if you want to be Abraham's children, or if you like to name it, claim it that you are Abraham's children, then you ought to be doing what Abraham did.
Abraham being the father, he was
of all
believers. He was the example
of what
that all believers should follow.
Yes, of his children, of God's children. And so, God woke me up at night and gave me a verse I have read 500 times. And it's found in Genesis chapter 12, is it?
That sounds.
I think it's 12. I'll try to find it in my Bible here.
See, the Jews wanted to just exist with a salvation that was just based on I have the right blood, I have the right genetics. And if I just, it's not much different than how we were raised in the Reformed theology of...
Well, we were saved by genetics.
Right. We were born into the right family, into the right religion.
Therefore, we had the lineage of Abraham.
Because our parents were spiritual Israel, and thus you were born
as part of
spiritual Israel.
But I don't think Jesus was saying that at all.
No. He said, keep my words. He said, obey my words.
You're falling out of the video.
I know, this chair loves to move. He was saying, if you keep my words, then you are my disciples. Then you are
what Abraham did.
What Abraham did.
And I want to look at Genesis chapter 12. I'm just going to read a portion. It's just the beginning of the first verse. You ready? Now the Lord said to Abram.
What?
What? Now I read that 100 times. But when the Lord woke my butt up in the middle of the night and said, duh! Do you not understand how Abraham came to know God? Abraham came to know God, the father of all who believe, by God speaking to him. Now the Lord said to Abram, the voice of God said to Abraham, and then he gave him some direction and said, this is what I want you to do. Now we talk about that a lot, that one ought to hear the voice of the Son of God and enter into a relationship of salvation. And now I all of a sudden am confronted by Abram. And Abram, at 2 o'clock in the morning, God says, duh, don't you realize that Abram, the father of all who believe, came to salvation by obeying the voice of the Lord?
The instructions that God laid out to Abram after starting to speak to him was not a theological viewpoint. It was not a religious viewpoint of, if you have all this lined up and you maybe come forward and be baptized, maybe. No!
Was Abraham baptized?
That's a great question. No, you don't have any of that.
Now let's understand. Abraham never went to church. Never did a religious commitment to a church organization, to a religious organization. all he had and all he knew was God.
Yep.
He had a personal, speaking, hearing, walking with relationship with God. Now, when Jesus said to the scribes and Pharisees and the religious leadership, do what Abram did, I wonder what he had in mind. Well, first of all, it appears that they weren't doing
Right. They were not doing
what Jesus wanted, what God wanted them to do.
Absolutely not.
So what were they doing? Well, they were carrying on religious activities. They were very nice religious people. They made sure that everybody saw how they were the leaders and how they could handle the scriptures and how they had been educated in the Pharisaic school of religion.
But what they didn't have
is the voice of God.
They had eliminated the voice of God out of their entire system.
Right.
Yep.
Now, let's understand, we got a video that said Jeremiah, and God said to Jeremiah, why aren't you listening to my voice?
Our video on Jesus talking to the Pharisees and saying, you invalidate the word of God because of your tradition.
Tradition of men, the voice of God,
and so
Matthew 15.
And Jesus is running into it again. That this religious system was based on genetics. It was based on following these religious activities. It was not based on what God had said. This is what a relationship would be based on.
Now the scribes and Pharisees were the religious leadership of the time, and they were far from God. Far from God. But they had been trained in their tree of the knowledge of good and evil mind, and that mind became distorted because Eve ate the apple, or whatever it was, and Satan said to Eve, if you eat that apple, you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And of course, that was Satan's idea. It wasn't God's. God's idea was that they not eat of this. And Satan said, no, you will be like God by knowing.
God said, do not eat of it. And Satan said, no, you eat of it.
Oh, then.
Whoa.
Oh,
man,
you're going to be God.
Yeah. The benefits far outweigh the negatives.
And we need to understand that the mind of man was perverted by that tree. Yeah, you're going to be like God by knowing. Knowing. And knowing, of course, is not done in my foot. No. Knowing is done in the natural man's mind. And Jesus is saying here to these people who had knowing, who had all kinds of knowing, I had education, as do the religious leadership of the religious community today, got all kinds of training in their mind, but they're not doing what Abraham did.
Because Abraham was a laid out foundation that God expected every believer that came after Abraham
To copy.
to copy.
To copy.
Do what he did. Jesus
Do
told them.
Now, to activate your actions to follow his actions. No. God never told Abraham to start a church or to go to church. I mean, let's get this idea. Where did this idea of the traditional religious system come from? Surely didn't come from God.
God did not have this laid out. That's been this question for a long time. If God if he found the religious worship system to be so important, wouldn't he have laid that out and how that should look and function and who would be in charge of it and what, the order of worship should be?
Well, he did. In 1 Corinthians 14:26, he laid out how the assembly was to
This is
happen.
what it should look like.
This is what it should be. But no. Religious cemetery education educates their mind to get to a system
God laid it out so simple. Believing what God said, God made it as simple as he could make it.
And Jesus said, if you are able to have children, if you're not, do as Abraham did. Now, God spoke to Abraham, and what did he do?
He believed.
He believed, and then what? His belief was in his head or in his feet?
He got to moving.
He moved out of Ur of the Chaldees. Now, let's understand that Abraham wasn't a, quote, Christian or even a believer. He was a pagan. A pagan, as are all men, until they come to hearing the voice of God. Man by his nature is pagan.
He did not have, he was not a Jew. He didn't have some Judaistic religion that he was following and then God came and spoke. No. He lived in the middle of nowhere, Ur of the Chaldees, and God just came and started speaking to him, and he responded in the positive.
Now, Romans 4:11, where it says Abraham is the father of all belief, tells us that Abraham came into a relationship with God before he was circumcised. He didn't get circumcised into salvation. No. He was circumcised after salvation as a sign of God's work in his life. So God said to Abraham, get out of your country and go to a land that I will show you. Did God say, I'm going to bring you over to Coonsville? No. God didn't even tell him where he was going. No, God says,
get up
and let me lead you.
I'm going to bring you there.
I'm going to bring you where I want you.
And yet, at that point, that whole journey from Ur to where God wanted to Canaan, where God was going to show him, circumcision hadn't happened yet. Yet he's walking in obedience to God as he's going.
So Abraham did what God said, and he left Ur, his home country, and I know that his father and his brother were tied with that, and Lot, but there was very few of them. I'm certain he had all kinds of family he left there. And he abandoned them and went and did what God said. In fact, his father abandoned God, but we won't get into that. So Abraham went into Canaan, and on the way, when he was there, God said to Abraham, I want you to sacrifice. Or Abraham didn't have any kids. He said, I'm going to make you a great nation.
A whole bunch of promises that didn't make sense.
A physical nation or a spiritual nation? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Both. He was going to make a great spiritual nation out of Abraham. Spiritual? Yeah. By doing what Abraham did.
Not by claiming what God said to Abraham.
Not going to a cemetery and having Abraham did not get educated by a cemetery. So that's not doing what Abraham did. No. Abraham did what God said. And God said, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to make you as the stars. And Abraham, and you know what? Abraham struggled with God. He struggled believing what God said. And God said, one time God said, by the time I come back here next year, you're going to have a baby. And Sarah's hanging behind the curtain laughing. She was a great believer too. At least Abraham didn't laugh at God. And God did what he said. Then God said to him, hey, I want you to go and sacrifice your son, your only son. And I'll show you where. Now, do you think that was easy?
You realize that there was a period of time in Abraham's life, it was rough.
Do what Abraham did,
Yep.
God said.
Yep.
And what did Abraham do?
He believed.
He believed. And it says in Hebrews, I think, that Abraham believed that if he killed his son, that God would raise him back to life. It wasn't that so he did what God said. Got his donkey, firewood, a sun, a fire, and packed off to where God said, hey, go that way. And so Abraham went to a mountain, set up an altar, ties his son. Now, what kind of son could let his dad tie himself to an altar, tie him down for a sacrifice? Well, he had quite a boy there.
Doesn't seem normal.
He seemed to listen to Abraham quite well. He didn't fight and run away.
No, that's probably.
I had been gone.
That's probably why it kind of goes Abraham, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Is that there was such a foundation laid in Isaac's life.
Isaac saw Abraham follow God, obey God.
And you look at that because Isaac's only example in his life of a relationship with God was Abraham.
And it says there, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him as righteousness. His belief was accepted by God as righteousness. Was Abraham by nature righteous? No. But God accounted him as righteous. Well, those who believe and do what Abraham did and follow the voice of God are accounted as righteous, as Abraham was, by doing and obeying the voice of God. Now let's understand, we said it before, I'll say it again, that the first time God spoke to Abraham, we got it in chapter 12, verse 1, led to God speaking to Abraham again, and again, and again, and again, and again. So it led to a life of the voice of God in Abraham's life. So if you are Abraham's children, do as Abraham did.
Do the same thing Abraham did. The voice of God came to Abraham, and Abraham goes, I'm going to believe you.
Nowhere did God say to Abraham, I want you to make confession of faith. Abraham, I want you to pray a sinner's prayer. Go forward to the altar that you built and put your son on.
Nope.
And I want you to pray at that altar, pray a sinner's prayer, and then you'll be saved.
Now, you would think you'd find it in chapter 12 of Genesis, right in the beginning of his first thing. You'd think it'd be right on the top of the list.
Right, that's the first thing. And God said to Abraham, "Go and pray a sinner's prayer."
Yeah.
No.
Go confess all your
sins. No, I don't. In fact, I don't see Abraham confessing any sin.
No,
I guess he was by very nature righteous. All by himself.
Is that what it was?
I don't think so.
No.
In fact, God never confronted Abraham about his sinfulness. Now, Abraham did so. When God said, stay in this land, Abraham went to Egypt.
Right.
He didn't listen to God. But he was the father of all believers. Did he experience things from disobedience to God that God disciplined him in his life for? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. First thing he did when he went disobeying God is he lost his wife. He said, what? Well, the Pharaoh of Egypt took Abraham's wife to be one of his girls.
Yeah, that was the Abimelech guy?
Yeah, no, this is
the other guy.
In Egypt. He did it twice. Yep. He did it twice. Right. My wife is my sister, not my wife.
Yeah.
And then he got caught sporting.
That's right.
Sporting with his wife is the word in the King James.
Yeah.
Means chasing each other around sexually. And the guy saw him and said, wait a minute.
Hold on.
What are you doing? Having sex with your sister?
I was going to make a joke about certain states, but nope. They're from Ur. They're weird that way. Must have been pagan.
So let's understand something, friends. All this religious crap is not doing what Abraham did.
Nope. No, Abraham was just as started out in the same position
as any one of
us. A slave to sin, as it says in John 8. He was a slave to sin.
Yes, he was.
And when God came and spoke to him and he believed and obeyed God,
God said, I see you as righteous now.
And God set him free from that. Said, let's go. Let's move on.
Let's walk together.
Yep.
And so they did. Abraham spent a lifetime walking with God, communing with God, talking back and forth with God. That is what God wants for those who are the children of Abraham. If you do what Abraham did in obedience to the voice of God, you will be an Abraham.
Yep.
And God said to Abraham,
I'm going to make many.
I'm going to make many Abrahams.
Yep. I'm going to multiply you, he said.
I'm going to multiply you, Abraham.
And
he didn't say I'm going to multiply your procreation. No. God said to Abraham, I am going to multiply you. And how is he going to do that? By doing what Abraham did. One became a child of Abraham. But not doing what Abraham did will always lead you and anyone else to damnation. And so Jesus said, do what Abraham did. And we highly recommend you do.
Because Abraham was a man blessed by God. He was a man who walked with God, talked with God.
No, he was just a poor guy. God didn't.
That's right.
He lived on breadcrumbs.
Yep. Poor guy. I don't know what was up with him.
Take a look at Abraham. He was such a poor sap.
I know. It's poor saps are known to go to war. They're known to have way too many flocks and herds and have a pick of the land. I don't know. He's just weird. He was a weird poor guy.
And in Genesis 19, I think, we have all of a sudden 3 men appeared to Abraham. Now, they didn't knock up the road. No. They appeared. That means Snapple and 3 men, and one of them was the Lord.
He goes up and he says to one of them, my Lord.
My Lord. My Lord came to spend time with Abraham and tell Abraham what he was about to do. That sounds like a prophet.
Yep. I distinctly remember
Abraham called the prophet.
God calling Abraham my prophet.
Yeah. And he said it to Abimelech, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, I highly recommend. Not my job to tell you what to do. But God tells you, if you're going to be Abraham's seed, spiritual seed, who is the father of all who believe, you need to do as Abraham did. Anything else?
Yep, that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you next time.
Bye.